The first words out of her mouth weren't, "Good morning," or "Welcome aboard." They were, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move." Heads turned. Even in first class, where champagne glasses tinkled and seat belts gleamed like polished silver, you could feel the temperature in the room drop. It was the kind of moment where politeness gets strangled by prejudice before it even draws breath. Amara Lewis didn't flinch. She'd been on enough flights, in enough boardrooms, and through enough back doors in life to know exactly what was happening. The tone, the way the flight attendant's eyes flickered over her tailored suit but clung, just a second too long, to the shade of her skin. Her boarding pass still rested in her hand, the big, block letters 1A, as undeniable as gravity. She offered it with a calm smile. "This is my seat." The attendant didn't even glance at it. "I think you might be in the wrong section. This is first class. Let's get you settled somewhere more comfortable for you." A pause. A whisper from the man in 1B, clutching his newspaper like a shield. "God, she's doing it again." Somewhere behind them, a woman with oversized sunglasses took her phone out pretending to scroll, but the tiny camera lens gleamed like an eager witness. Amara could have ended it there. She could have stood, revealed her title, silenced the cabin with the weight of her authority. But that would have been too easy, too merciful. Instead, she leaned back into her seat, her voice low and steady. "Are you sure you want to have this conversation in front of your passengers?" The attendant's smile stiffened into a smirk. "Rules are rules. I'm going to ask you one last time, please gather your things." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a slight delay for final preparations. Amara caught her reflection in the polished window, poised, patient, dangerous. Years of being underestimated had made her fluent in the art of silence. A silence that was starting to make the people around her very uncomfortable. The businessman across the aisle, a silver-haired regular who knew the routes as well as the crew, cleared his throat. "She's in her seat." "Why don't you, sir?" The attendant snapped. "This doesn't concern you." Oh, but it did. It concerned everyone watching, everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong somewhere they'd worked their whole life to reach. Amara's mind drifted for half a second to the meeting waiting for her on the other side of the flight. The boardroom. The faces of the old executives who'd spent weeks guessing what the new CEO would look like. She wondered if any of them imagined this. The champagne cart clinked into view. Another attendant, older, with weary eyes, caught sight of the scene and froze. Recognition flickered. Her lips parted, then closed again, like she'd just remembered she had bills to pay. The younger attendant kept going. "If you don't move, I'll have security escort you off the plane." Amara smiled. "Security? Perfect. Let's get them in here. I'd love for them to hear exactly why you think I don't belong in my assigned seat." A ripple went through the cabin. Phones angled. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered, "This is going to be on TikTok." The attendant's eyes darted nervously between the recording passengers and Amara's steady gaze. For the first time, her confidence faltered. But she still didn't know. She didn't know that the woman she was trying to push into the back of the plane was the reason this airline had survived the last fiscal year. She didn't know that in less than 3 hours, Amara would walk into a headquarters where her signature alone could decide the fate of her career. She didn't know that every second she spent doubling down on this mistake was tightening a noose she'd woven with her own arrogance. Amara leaned forward slightly, her voice soft enough that only the attendant could hear. "Be careful. Some seats come with more power than you think." The attendant blinked, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You'll find out before we land." The attendant straightened, pulling back like Amara's words had pricked her skin. She forced a brittle laugh. "Well, until then, I still have a cabin to manage." She walked off, her heels clicking against the aisle like gavel strikes. Conversations resumed, hushed and jagged, like broken glass being swept under a rug. Amara didn't move. She sipped her water, her fingers steady on the glass, though inside she could feel the old, familiar burn in her chest. She had promised herself she wouldn't let it get to her any more, the sideways glances, the small humiliations. But some days, the weight of constantly proving she belonged was heavier than the suitcases crammed in the overhead bins. A man in his late 60s leaned toward her from across the aisle. His voice was gravelly, a little angry on her behalf. "You handled that well. I wouldn't have been so patient." Amara offered him a small smile. "You'd be surprised what patience can accomplish." He nodded like he understood, but his eyes were tired in a way that told her he'd fought battles like hers before, just in different uniforms, different decades. The engines hummed to life. A deep vibration filled the cabin as the crew prepared for takeoff. Amara turned to the window, letting the movement outside blur into streaks of motion service trucks, flashing beacons, the slow crawl of other planes lining up for departure. But she could still feel eyes on her. Not the curious glances of strangers anymore, those faded quickly when people realized you weren't going to make a scene. These were the lingering stares of the flight attendant, who had returned to stand at the front of the cabin. Amara caught her gaze and held it. This time, the attendant looked away first. 30 minutes into the flight, the tension still hadn't loosened. Drinks had been served, meal orders taken, but Amara noticed a pattern each time the attendant reached her row. She spoke only to the man in 1B. Even when Amara's water glass sat empty, the woman ignored it, moving on as though the seat was vacant. 1B noticed too. "Want me to get her for you?" he whispered. "No," Amara said, smiling faintly. "Let's see how far she's willing to take this." It was a dangerous game. Not for her. Amara's position made her untouchable in ways the crew didn't yet realize, but for the attendant, whose every move was being quietly documented by at least 3 passengers with phones. The businessman in 2A leaned forward over his tray. "You know this is going viral, right?" Amara shrugged. "Then maybe it will serve as a case study." A case study for what? How bias can strip away professionalism in under 30 seconds. An hour later, the air in the cabin had shifted. The other flight attendants, 2 men and the older woman from earlier, had started approaching Amara directly, offering coffee, checking in. But the younger woman still avoided her entirely. It might have gone on that way until landing in unspoken standoff, if not for the turbulence. The first jolt came suddenly, shaking the glasses on the drink cart. A second, harder, made a passenger gasp somewhere in business class. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some rough air. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The crew moved quickly to secure the cabin, but Amara noticed it instantly. The younger attendant was rattled. Her hands trembled as she locked the galley doors. She moved down the aisle toward the jump seat, eyes darting like she was silently counting passengers. Another drop. This one sharper. Amara's stomach lifted as the plane briefly lost altitude. The attendant reached her row and, for the first time, actually looked at Amara. Not with disdain this time, but with something closer to vulnerability. Can you make sure your seatbelt's tight?" she asked. Amara pulled the belt snug. "Tighter than your job security," she murmured. The attendant blinked, unsure if she'd heard right, then hurried on. When the turbulence eased, the cabin exhaled as one. Nervous laughter bubbled up. People checked their watches, pretending the last 10 minutes hadn't made their hearts race. The attendant reappeared, forcing her professional smile back into place. She crouched by 1B's seat. "Sir, is there anything I can get you?" Before he could answer, Amara's phone buzzed. A notification. She glanced at it and felt a small, private satisfaction. It was an email from corporate. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Lewis. Your leadership announcement has been approved for public release at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time." She checked the flight schedule. They were landing at 4:20. Perfect. The next hour passed slowly. Amara drafted a few notes for her first official address as CEO. She didn't write about profits or strategy or shareholder value. She wrote about dignity, belonging, how an airline isn't just a business, it's a moving microcosm of society, sealed in a metal tube thousands of feet in the air. And how, in that tube, the smallest gestures offered or withheld can define the experience for everyone on board. By the time the descent began, she had nearly finished. She closed her laptop and glanced up just in time to see the younger attendant making final checks. When the wheels touched down, a ripple of applause moved through the cabin. The captain thanked them for flying. Passengers began gathering their belongings, the usual shuffle of bags and coats filling the aisles. The older attendant approached Amara's seat with a warm smile. "Ms. Lewis, it's been a pleasure having you with us today." Her tone carried a subtle weight, like she knew exactly who she was speaking to now. The younger one froze mid-step. Amara rose slowly, taking her time to retrieve her bag from the overhead bin. She turned to the attendant who had spent the last 4 hours pretending she didn't exist. I'll need you to escort me to the terminal, Amara said softly. There's someone waiting to meet me. The woman's professional mask slipped just a little. Of course, ma'am. They walked together down the jet bridge, the hum of the engines fading behind them. At the gate, a small group of executives stood waiting, men in tailored suits, women in crisp blouses, all wearing the airline's insignia. The lead executive stepped forward, smiling broadly. Ms. Lewis, welcome. We're honored to officially introduce you as our new chief executive officer. Gasps. A collective intake of breath from the nearby crew. The attendant's face drained of color. Amara turned to her, her voice calm but carrying enough weight for the gathered audience to hear. You never know who you're talking to, or who you're trying to move out of their seat. The silence that followed was heavier than any turbulence. And for the first time that day, Amara allowed herself a real smile. The news traveled faster than luggage on a conveyor belt. By the time Amara reached the terminal lounge, someone had already uploaded the mid-flight footage, her calm defiance, the flight attendant's dismissive tone, the pointed "be careful" warning on his social media. Within minutes, it was trending in 3 countries. Seat 1A was everywhere. A young reporter, barely out of journalism school, sprinted across the lounge with a microphone, tripping over her own enthusiasm. Ms. Lewis, how does it feel to be subjected to such treatment on the very airline you now led? Amara paused, allowing the question to hang in the air. Every phone in the room was pointed at her now. It feels, she said, like an opportunity. The crowd leaned in. She didn't elaborate, didn't offer them the easy outrage they were hoping for. Instead, she gave a polite nod and continued walking, flanked by 2 senior executives who were doing their best to look composed despite the quiet panic in their eyes. The boardroom was waiting. A long table gleamed under cold fluorescent lights. Dozens of eyes followed her as she entered, not with the polite curiosity of strangers, but with the thinly veiled calculation of people suddenly realizing they'd underestimated the person now in charge of their careers. She set her bag down, took her seat at the head of the table, and let the silence do the work for her. Finally, the head of operations cleared his throat. Ms. Lewis. About the incident. We'll discuss it, she said, but in the context of a larger issue. A flicker of discomfort moved across the room. She opened her laptop and projected a slide onto the wall. Culture in the cabin. Respect is a standard, not a privilege. I don't care if you're on a 2-hour domestic flight or crossing oceans, she began. Respect is not a luxury item we hand out depending on a passenger's appearance. It is a non-negotiable part of our service. She saw some executives shifting in their seats, already wondering how much this would cost in retraining programs. But she kept going, her voice steady. The woman on my flight today didn't know I was her CEO. That's the point. Respect should not be dependent on a title or on knowing who someone is. If I'd been an ordinary passenger, which I am, most of the time would I still have been treated with courtesy? The answer was obvious and heavy in the room. 3 days later, she met the flight attendant again. The setting couldn't have been more different. A small, unassuming conference room at the airline's training center. No suits, no cameras, no audience, just the 2 of them, a table and a closed door. The attendant, her name tag read K. Holbrook, looked pale, like she hadn't slept in days. She kept her hands folded in front of her, twisting the edge of a tissue. I suppose this is where you fire me, she said flatly. Amara studied her for a long moment. That's one option. Holbrook's jaw tightened. Look, I don't expect sympathy. I messed up, but you have to understand. I deal with difficult passengers all the time. Sometimes you just make a snap judgment. Yes, Amara said quietly. You made one about me. Holbrook's eyes dropped. I was wrong. Amara leaned forward slightly. You weren't just wrong about who I was. You were wrong about what I deserved. And that's what concerns me. The attendant opened her mouth, but no words came out. I could end your career today, Amara continued. But that would be too easy. Too clean. I think there's more value in you learning exactly how it feels to be on the other side of your own assumptions. Holbrook's brow furrowed. What do you mean? I'm assigning you, Amara said, to work alongside our diversity and inclusion trainers for the next 6 months. You'll listen to passenger experiences stories like mine, and far worse. You'll see how bias operates when no one's watching, and you'll help design training to prevent it. Holbrook's eyes widened. You're not firing me. I believe in accountability, Amara said. And I believe people can change if they're willing to do the work. Are you? The younger woman swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. Good. Because if you're not, this conversation will end very differently. By the following week, the video had shifted from being just a viral scandal to a case study in leadership. Commentators praised Amara's restraint and her decision to reform rather than simply punish. Passengers shared their own stories of bias in travel, some heartbreaking, others infuriating. And through it all, Amara kept the focus where it belonged, not on herself, but on the idea that respect and service should be a default setting, not a performance triggered by status. 2 months later, Amara boarded another flight on the same route. As she stepped into first class, a familiar figure greeted her. Holbrook hair neatly tied back, posture professional, eyes softer than before. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Lewis," she said, voice steady. "May I take your coat?" Amara handed it over. "Thank you." The rest of the flight was uneventful in the best possible way. Every passenger, in every seat, received the same attentiveness. No one was in the wrong section. No one was invisible. When they landed, Holbrook approached her quietly. "I just wanted to say, I understand now. It's not about titles. It's about humanity." Amara met her gaze. "That's all I ever wanted you to see." They parted at the gate without ceremony. Without cameras, just two people who had once been adversaries, now sharing a moment of mutual understanding. Weeks later, Amara would still get tagged in posts with the hashtag Seat1A. Some used it to call out injustice. Others used it as a reminder that your seat, literal or metaphorical, has value, no matter what anyone else assumes. And whenever she saw it, she thought back to that first flight as CEO. The champagne glasses, the forced smile, the slow, dangerous satisfaction of knowing exactly who you are, even when someone else is desperate to put you somewhere else. Because the truth was simple, and it hadn't changed since that day. Some seats you earn, some seats you fight for, and some seats, once you've taken them, you never let anyone move you from again. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.